I've been in the media a fair bit lately talking about Mulcair's comments, but just the nature of television means that I can't say everything I want to say. There's just simply not enough time. So I thought I'd make this quick little video just to clarify some of the issues I have with it. So basically what Mulcair's been saying is that because the oil sands don't pay for carbon, that there's an externality there, and if these companies had to pay for that externality, that would change their production somehow, driving down the Canadian dollar. So before I begin, I should say that I fully support a comprehensive system of carbon pricing. I have for a long time. Just Google Peugeot Club, you'll see me on there. So I have no problems with that. My difficulty is with some of the particulars here. So first of all, it's really hard to see how a carbon tax necessarily would significantly drive down the dollar. It really depends on how, is a carbon tax cap and trade, how are the permits being put out, and what the government does with the money. So it's not actually clear that what he's suggesting would accomplish driving down the dollar. But let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, he's correct. And we'll ignore the fact that a higher Canadian dollar is good for consumers. A higher Canadian dollar makes us more wealthy. Let's ignore all of that and just focus on, what a Canadian dollar does to exporters. So if we do all that, and we'll suppose that the Canadian dollar, again, would be driven down by a high carbon tax or cap and trade, we just have to remember that this should also apply to Ontario exporters. So there's two competing effects here that say if you're an exporter in Ontario, that yes, you would benefit from a lower Canadian dollar, but now you're paying a carbon tax that your U.S. competitors aren't. So it's not really clear that this would necessarily benefit exporters. Now, an exporter like my company, Next Right Compliance, that is in services, has almost no carbon footprint. We would benefit from this, again, assuming that this would actually drive down the Canadian dollar. But say if you're in manufacturing, which is what Mulcair seems to be wanting to help, a lot of these companies have fairly significant carbon footprint. So it's not clear to me that a company would benefit from such a plan. And I think a lot of companies would be hurt from such a plan. Aluminum smelting, the steel industry, and I believe even the auto industry. So the only way Mulcair's comments really make sense is if this carbon tax would only apply to the oil sands and potash in those industries and not apply to aluminum, steel, automotive, Bombardier, companies like that. And you'll note that he's never actually said that this tax would, or cap and trade or carbon pricing, would apply to those companies. So you have a system that only makes sense if this pricing doesn't apply to them. And, Mulcair's never suggested that this pricing would apply to them. So if that's the case, that you have carbon pricing that only applies to a few resource industries, this is basically NEP 2.0, that what you're doing is you're requiring companies in Alberta and Saskatchewan to pay carbon pricing. A lot of, that money would go to the federal government, but Ontario and Quebec industry would not. So it's basically just a huge wealth transfer from the prairies to the federal government, if that's in fact what's being proposed here. So I would really like to see Mulcair tell us exactly what he has in mind, because reading between the lines here, there's really no other way to read it than him promoting an NEP 2.0 type plan. And naturally, I find this dangerous for Canada, even if I'm in southwestern Ontario and own a company that would benefit greatly or potentially benefit greatly from such a plan. I believe this is it's bad for the economy, but I think it's also dangerous for national unity. So I'm Mike Moffatt, and those are my thoughts on Mulcair's plan.